Hi, I'm Timothy, and this is Last Memories. Today, I'm looking at what happens when a wedding becomes content, and the content becomes a death case. From a wild mushroom that made it to the rehearsal dinner table, to a bachelorette bonfire that turned a canyon into the last place bride-to-be ever stood. It was October 2015 on a privately owned farmstead about 40 miles east of the California coast. Trees packed in close, air thick with wet pine and rotting leaves. An old barn converted into an event space with forest on three sides and no neighbors for miles. Exactly the kind of place Torin Vasca had been building his entire channel around. Torin Vasca was 34, and he'd been running his foraging and natural living channel since 2013. Wild plant identification, seasonal harvests, fermentation, the whole thing. For the rehearsal dinner, he wanted the menu to reflect that, so in the 2 weeks leading up to the wedding, he had been foraging across the property and the surrounding forest, collecting ingredients he planned to serve to his closest family and friends. Callum Drew was 31. Torin's younger brother and only sibling. He'd driven up from Sacramento 2 days early just to help with setup. Freelance carpenter, no medical history, completely healthy. Someone who shows up before anyone asks and eats whatever's put in front of him without a second thought. A very fun person to be with, except that night. It was the worst thing about him. The night of the rehearsal dinner, Torin put together the spread himself. Foraged ingredients, homemade everything, true to his brand down to the last dish. One of the appetizers was a mushroom dish, sautéed in butter, passed around alongside bread and a charcuterie board. 14 people ate from it. Callum went back for seconds and finished what was left. The dinner went well, people had drinks, and went to bed. The next morning was the wedding day, and everyone felt completely fine. Torin and Willa got married. The reception ran long. Callum gave a toast and got on the dance floor. A normal night by every measure. Then, about 18 hours later, Callum started throwing up. He figured it was the alcohol. He'd had a few drinks at the reception, nothing crazy, but enough to explain it. He drank some water and lay down. By the next morning, he was worse. He could barely get out of bed, stomach cramping, running to the bathroom every hour. He told Torin he thought it was food poisoning and didn't want to make it a whole thing. He still didn't get checked out. Around day 3, he started feeling better. He wasn't throwing up anymore, felt good enough to pack up and drive home. He made it about 20 miles before he had to pull over. His skin had gone yellow and his stomach was visibly swollen. He called Torin and said something felt really wrong. He was taken in that afternoon. By the time he was examined, his liver was already failing. Blood work came back bad, enzymes through the roof, fluid building in his abdomen, damage that couldn't be undone. He deteriorated fast over the next 12 hours, confused, then unresponsive. His kidneys started going too. He lost consciousness on the 4th day and never came back from it. Callum Drew died on the morning of the 5th day. The other 13 people got sick too. Some had nausea, some had stomach issues, and a couple of them were in pretty bad shape. 2 of them needed medical observation. Everyone else eventually recovered. The only difference between them and Callum was how much each person had eaten that night. He was the one who finished the board. Investigators pulled the remaining raw mushrooms from the farmhouse refrigerator and sent them for identification. They were not the edible species Torin believed them to be. The case was ruled accidental. No charges were filed. A misidentification, not malice. Cause of death on record, acute liver failure. The coroner noted the amount he consumed was consistent with a lethal dose, and that the delay between symptoms and treatment made survival unlikely, regardless of when he got help. Torin's channel went private within days. The foraging content was pulled without explanation, and he never posted again. The food that killed him was made with love by the one person at that table who never would have hurt him. What comes next is a story about a prank that was supposed to be the highlight of the reception, but ended up killing someone who had nothing to do with it. It was spring of 2016 at a privately rented event hall connected to a golf course property on the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee. Indoor venue, climate-controlled, round tables across a polished hardwood floor, a small stage at the far end where the DJ had set up, a completely normal wedding reception setup. Brixton Fail was 29 and had been running his prank and social experiment channel since 2014, all filmed with hidden cameras and edited for maximum reaction. His entire brand ran on one idea: nothing was off limits if it got a reaction. So when it came to his own wedding reception, he saw an opportunity he couldn't pass up. Noreen Callist was 58, Brixton's aunt on his mother's side, and one of the people he was closest to in his family. She had driven in from Knoxville the day before and was seated at the family table near the front of the room. She had a history of anxiety and mild high blood pressure, but nothing that raised any flags. People who knew her said she startled easily, jumpy at loud noises, took a moment to settle. Everyone around her was used to it. Weeks before the wedding, Brixton had hired 4 actors. 2 would come in posing as uninvited guests with a history involving the bride. 2 more would pose as security. It would escalate into a loud physical confrontation near the entrance. Hidden cameras already set up around the room. The entire wedding party, including his fiancée Saoirse, was in on it. As far as everyone else was concerned, it was just a reception. The prank kicked off at around 8:40 p.m., about an hour into the reception. The 2 actors came through the main doors loud and aggressive. Things escalated fast. Raised voices, a table knocked over, one actor grabbing the other by the collar. The room reacted exactly the way Brixton had hoped. People stood up, some backed toward the walls, some moved toward the exit. It was loud and it was chaotic, and from where most people were sitting, it looked completely real. Now think about what that looks like if you genuinely have no idea it's staged. You're 58, you're sitting near the front, and out of nowhere, there's a full-blown physical confrontation happening right in front of you. No warning or context. That's exactly what Noreen was sitting in the middle of. A guest beside her noticed her grip the edge of the table. She stood up partway, then sat back down heavily. Her face had gone pale. Within about 90 seconds of the whole thing starting, Noreen slumped sideways in her chair. The guest beside her caught her before she hit the floor and started calling for help. The actors were still going. Brixton was watching from a side corridor on a monitor, and when he saw the commotion near the family table, he thought it was just guests reacting to the prank. It took 3 to 4 minutes from the moment Noreen lost consciousness for the room to figure out that something real was happening. 3 to 4 minutes. The prank got called off. Someone with basic first aid training got to her and started chest compressions. A call for help went out. Responders arrived about 11 minutes after the call. By that point, she had been unresponsive for an estimated 8 to 10 minutes. She was transported and worked on for over an hour. She didn't make it and was pronounced dead that night. The post-mortem came back with Takotsubo cardiomyopathy as the cause of death, a condition where sudden intense shock causes the heart's main pumping chamber to stop working. The coroner noted her anxiety history and high blood pressure made her more vulnerable. Manner of death was ruled accidental, no criminal charges filed. Civil proceedings between the families were settled privately. On the other side of the country, a newlywed couple was 2 miles offshore in Hawaii, filming a shark cage dive for their honeymoon series when everything went wrong. It was the summer of 2017, 2 miles off the north shore of Oahu, Hawaii. Surface swells were running between 4 and 6 feet with a strong lateral current pushing from the northwest. Underwater visibility was around 40 feet. Dax and Celavurn had been running their adventure travel channel together since 2014. Extreme destinations, sponsored content, the kind of trips most people only watch from a couch. The shark cage dive was the centerpiece of their honeymoon series, already partially sponsored before the wedding even happened. Sela was 27, athletic, comfortable in open water, and had done cage diving once before. She was not a certified diver, and for this dive she was using a hookah system system, a long air hose connected to a compressor on the boat above instead of carrying her own tank. A hose keeping you breathing sounds like the safest thing in the world. On that dive, it was the opposite. The charter operator ran the standard briefing that morning. Stay inside the cage, keep your limbs away from the bars, do not reach outside under any circumstances. They had done this before, so they had probably heard a version of that speech already. The bait drum went into the water at around 9:15 a.m., and within minutes, 3 Galapagos sharks had moved into the area. These are not the reef sharks most people picture when they think of cage diving. Galapagos sharks run between 6 and 10 feet, and they get noticeably more aggressive around active feeding. Both Dax and Sella were inside the cage filming. The sharks were circling at around 15 to 20 feet out, close enough to look great on camera, far enough to feel like everything was under control. As the feeding picked up, the sharks got closer. One of them, around 8 feet, started circling tighter around the cage. The current had also been pushing the cage sideways since it went in, and the operator had already noticed it drifting off the anchor line. Then, at around 9:38 a.m., a strong surge hit and shoved the cage hard to the left, spinning it on its tether. Sella was in the lower left corner filming upward when it happened. The surge knocked her off balance, and her left arm went through the bar gap as she grabbed for something to hold on to. Here's where the hookah hose becomes a problem. It had wrapped around the lower left bar during the rotation, and when the cage shifted, the hose pulled tight and pinned her left shoulder and upper arm against the outside of the bars. She couldn't pull back. The shark that had been making the close passes was about 8 feet away when her arm came through the bars. It redirected within seconds. Single bite, left arm just below the elbow. The force of it pulled her arm further out before the shark let go and turned away. Dax got to her from across the cage almost immediately. The crew above had seen the surge and were already hauling the cage up. She was on the deck in under 2 minutes. The bleeding was immediate and heavy. A tourniquet went on. The boat was 2 miles from shore, 18 minutes at full speed. Sella lost consciousness about 6 minutes into the transit. By the time the boat reached the harbor, her pulse was gone. She was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at shore. The post-mortem confirmed she died from blood loss. The bite had cut through the main artery in her forearm, and 18 minutes on a boat 2 miles from shore was simply not enough time. The cause of death was ruled accidental. The investigation pointed to the cage drifting off the anchor line and the hookah hose wrapping around the bar as the two things that put her arm outside the cage in the first place. No charges were filed. The operator's permit was reviewed and additional safety requirements were put in place for similar dives in the area after the case closed. The honeymoon series was never published. Sponsors quietly withdrew, and Dax posted a single statement to the channel shortly after. The account has not posted since. Coming up, a pre-wedding dirt bike ride through the Nevada desert where one groomsman hit something nobody saw coming and died hours later at camp with no way to get help in time. It was early October 2016, about 30 miles outside of Winnemucca, Nevada. High desert, unmarked dirt trails cutting through scrubland, hard-packed ground with loose gravel on top. The thing that makes terrain like that dangerous are the dry wash crossings, shallow creek beds that drop across the trail with no warning. From a moving bike, you don't see them until you're already in them. Rennick Salvar was 31 and ran a motorsport and overlanding channel built around off-road builds and desert riding content. 2 days before his wedding to Petra, he organized a pre-wedding dirt bike ride for his groomsmen. 5 guys, a trail system he had scouted once about a year earlier, and a plan to camp overnight before heading back for the ceremony. Garrett Owl was 34, one of Rennick's oldest friends and one of the 4 groomsmen on the trip. He had been riding since his early 20s, owned his own bike, and knew how to handle technical terrain. Not a professional, but nobody had any reason to worry about him out there. Before they set off, Rennick handed him a handheld camera, and Garrett offered to ride second in line and shoot footage from behind. They had been out for about 2 hours when they hit a section of trail Rennick remembered as clean and straightforward. Trail widened slightly. Surface looked good. Group was moving at a comfortable pace. Garrett was about 40 feet behind the lead rider, one hand on the throttle and the other on the camera, filming the guy ahead of him. At that point in the ride, nobody was thinking about anything except the next stretch of trail. The wash crossing came up with no warning from that approach angle. The lead rider hit it first and cleared it fine. His speed and angle carried him through. Garrett had one hand on the throttle and one hand on the camera. He had nothing free to brake with. His front wheel dropped into the wash at somewhere between 35 and 40 miles per hour. The bike stopped almost instantly as the front fork hit the far wall of the crossing. Garrett kept going. He went over the handlebars, his chest and chin catching the crossbar on the way over, and came down in the scrub on the far side about 12 feet from impact. The other guys got to him within seconds. Garrett was on his back, conscious, able to talk. He said he couldn't feel his legs. Nobody moved him. They got a call out, but the nearest road was 11 miles back and the location was nearly impossible to communicate precisely. Over the next hour, he got worse. His breathing went shallow and his blood pressure kept dropping. Two of the guys rode back toward the main road to get better signal and direct help in. There was nothing left to do at the scene but wait and hope help got there in time. Garrett lost consciousness about 90 minutes after the crash and never came back from it. By the time outside help reached the group, he had already been gone for over an hour. The post-mortem found a complete break in the upper neck with full spinal cord damage at that point. When the spinal cord gets cut off that high up, the brain stops being able to control basic body functions like blood pressure and heart rate. Everything shuts down. Without immediate medical help, there is no coming back from that. 11 miles from the nearest road, that was never a realistic possibility. The handheld camera was flagged as a direct contributing factor. The wash crossing was measured afterward at 14 inches deep with a near vertical far wall on the exit side. The death was ruled accidental. Rennick was interviewed at length. He had organized the ride, chosen the trail, and handed Garrett the camera. But the investigation closed without criminal charges. Off-road riding in unmarked terrain carries an assumed risk, and that was the determining factor. Whether civil proceedings followed between the families was not part of the public record. Garrett was buried in his hometown in Oregon. The footage Garrett had been shooting when he went down was recovered from the camera. Rennick never uploaded it. A completely different kind of equipment failure comes next. A cinema drone malfunctioned mid-flight over a seated wedding ceremony in Mendocino and dropped directly onto a guest in the third row. It was June 2015, a private property in Mendocino County, grass terrace 80 feet above the Pacific, open on three sides to consistent onshore wind. Guests in white chairs facing a floral arch at the cliff edge, ocean behind the efficient. Beautiful location, genuinely difficult to work in. Callum and Neve Austin had built their lifestyle brand around the idea that their life looked better than yours. The wedding was the peak of that, a cliffside ceremony fully documented for their channel. The venue picked as much for how it would look on camera as anything else. The drone footage was the centerpiece. They had hired a professional crew for it, and the lead operator had run the same setup across more than a dozen weddings without a problem. He had planned a series of passes, starting high and ending with a low sweep over the seated guests during the vows. It was going to look incredible. That was the whole point. Priya was 44, a close friend of the bride's family, who had flown in from Portland for the ceremony. She was seated in the third row, slightly left of center. She had helped Neve with planning in the weeks leading up to the wedding and had been looking forward to it for months. One of the operator's assistants had flagged the wind that morning. The gusts were coming in off the ocean in bursts, calm for a stretch, then hitting hard with little warning. The lead operator looked at it, decided it was fine, and they moved forward. The drone had been in the air about 22 minutes when the final low pass began. One person on that crew had a bad feeling. He wasn't the one making the call, though. The aircraft moved along the central aisle at approximately 14 feet, 6 to 7 feet of clearance above seated heads. The operator had a direct line of sight from the rear of the seating area. The assistant had flagged the wind. The operator had made his call. 14 feet sounds like a lot until you consider what was up there. Professional cinema drones fully loaded run 15 to 25 pounds, rotors spinning fast enough that a low-altitude failure leaves no recovery window, not for the operator, not for anyone underneath. It was up there because the shot required it. The channel required it. At the midpoint of the pass, directly above the third and fourth rows, the front left motor failed. No warning. The drone lost stability immediately, pitching and spinning. The operator sent an emergency landing command, already too late. It dropped in an uncontrolled spin. The leading rotor arm came down across the upper back and neck of the guest in the third row. Priya went forward out of her chair without making a sound. The drone came to rest on the grass between the rows. Someone with medical training reached her within seconds. Emergency responders arrived 14 minutes after the call went out. Priya died on impact. The motor failure to crash had taken under 2 seconds, and the mechanical fault was one no pre-flight check would have caught. The death was ruled accidental, but investigators found the broader risk. A heavy drone, 14 feet above seated guests in gusty coastal wind, was foreseeable. The footage it was sent up there to capture was never used. Callum and Neve's channel went quiet within weeks and never returned to regular posting. Civil proceedings followed. The outcome was sealed. New regional guidelines on drone operations over occupied outdoor spaces followed within months. 14 feet was all the distance between a routine wedding shoot and a fatality. In the Columbia River, what took someone down wasn't equipment at all. It was 110 inches of fabric and a wake that hit at the wrong second. It was August 2014 on the Columbia River near Hood River, Oregon. At that stretch, the river runs wide and moves fast, and in August, the water temperature sits around 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The charter boat was operating about a quarter mile from the nearest bank when it happened. Cade and Maren Solis had been running their travel and lifestyle channel since 2013. Their content was built around scenic destinations, local food, and the kind of trips that were more about atmosphere than adrenaline. The wedding was very much on brand. They had chartered a riverboat, kept the guest list to 12 people, and planned a small ceremony on the upper deck with a catered lunch below. Intimate and scenic, exactly the kind of thing their audience would have loved. Maren was 29. One thing worth knowing about her, she was not a strong swimmer. She had mentioned it once in a video, casually, as something she kept meaning to work on. She never did. On the day she went into that river, she was wearing a full-length layered chiffon wedding gown with a cathedral veil, 110 inches of fabric she had picked out months before because of how it moved in the wind on the water. The boat had been anchored in a calm section for the ceremony and had started a slow drift cruise downriver for the reception. Maren had planned a specific shot in advance, standing at the bow with the gorge behind her, veil out in the wind, Cade filming from behind. The forward deck railing was about 32 inches high, standard for a sightseeing vessel, not built as a safety barrier. Maren positioned herself right at the front of the bow, one hand on the railing, the other holding the veil out for the shot. The boat was moving at around 4 knots. A wake from a passing commercial vessel hit the port side of the bow without warning. 2 successive rolls. The first knocked her grip loose. The second took her over. She entered the water at the bow, and the boat's momentum carried it past her within seconds. Guests on the upper deck who saw it happen started shouting immediately. The operator cut the engine and began turning the boat around, a maneuver that took the better part of a minute against that current. Maren surfaced once, about 20 feet behind where the boat had been. She was already moving sideways with the river. The gown was pulling her down, and the veil had wrapped around her left arm during the fall. She went under again before anyone could get to her. 2 guests jumped in after her. One reached the area where she went under in about 90 seconds. She wasn't there anymore. The current had already moved her, and visibility beneath the surface in those conditions was basically zero. She was underwater for an estimated 11 to 13 minutes before she was found. Recovered about 200 yards downstream, caught against a submerged debris line near the bank. Resuscitation was attempted on the the riverbank and continued until emergency responders arrived by water. It didn't work. The coroner found 3 things had worked against her at once: cold water affecting her muscle function, the gown absorbing 25 to 30 pounds of water within seconds, and the veil restricting her left arm. Anyone alone might have been manageable. All 3 together, for someone who wasn't a strong swimmer, wasn't. The death was ruled accidental. The charter operator was cited for railing height and no life vest requirement on the forward deck. The boat footage was never shared and Cade deactivated the channel within the month. The last one tonight takes place in Arizona, where a bachelorette bonfire in a narrow desert canyon went from a perfect Instagram night to a wildfire in under 3 minutes. It was late September 2015, in a narrow canyon wash outside Sedona, Arizona. A single dirt road was the only way in, dead-ending at a flat clearing roughly 300 feet wide, with steep canyon walls on both sides covered in dry scrub, juniper, and brittle desert grass. The nearest paved road was 2.3 miles back, one way in, one way out. Finn Carew was not there that night. This was a bachelorette event. 8 women, a canyon, and a bonfire Dasha had been planning for weeks. She had been building her DIY and bohemian lifestyle channel for years. The kind where everything is handmade and every outdoor shoot looks effortless but took half a day to set up. She had scouted this canyon herself 2 weeks before and called it the most beautiful place she had ever found. The bonfire was big by design. She had wanted it visible and dramatic for the photos. Here is something worth knowing about late September in Sedona Canyon country. Fire season is winding down by then, but the vegetation is still critically dry enough to catch from almost nothing, and canyon terrain does something specific to fire that flat ground doesn't. The walls funnel the wind through the corridor, and fire moves through it faster than most people would ever expect. The only trail in and out of that clearing ran directly along the canyon floor. The group had been there for about 2 hours when the wind shifted. The canyon had been calm most of the evening, but around 9:20 p.m., a dry wind started pushing through from the north. Not a gust, just a steady push. Nobody even flinched at it because it barely felt like anything. An ember from the bonfire landed on a dried grass patch about 15 feet from the fire ring. One of the guests spotted it and said something. Dasha grabbed a water bottle and went toward it. By the time she got there, the flame had already moved to the base of a juniper shrub at the canyon wall. That shrub was fully involved in under 10 seconds. The fire started moving south along the canyon wall, straight toward the access trail. Within 3 minutes, it had covered 40 feet of scrub line and was beginning to cross the trail corridor. Everyone started moving toward the vehicles. The trail entrance was 300 feet away. Dasha went back for her camera bag. That decision took somewhere between 45 and 60 seconds, and when she turned back toward the trail, the fire had already reached it. Both sides of the narrow path were burning, and smoke was moving through the canyon corridor fast and low. She tried anyway, made it about 80 feet before the heat and smoke stopped her. She turned toward the far canyon wall because it was the only direction that wasn't burning. It was near vertical sandstone. There was nowhere to go. The most beautiful place she had ever found had one exit, and it was already gone. The other 7 women had made it to the vehicles. 2 of them tried to go back in on foot and got driven back by smoke within 30 feet of the trail entrance. They could hear her. They couldn't get to her. The trail was gone. Dasha was found the following morning. The response team had been unable to get into the canyon by vehicle the night before because the access road had caught too. She was at the base of the canyon wall, about 120 feet from the fire ring, as far from the fire as the terrain would allow. The post-mortem confirmed smoke inhalation as cause of death with secondary thermal injury. The canyon walls had trapped everything: smoke, heat, combustion gases, and the breathable air ran out. The smoke got to her well before the fire did. The death was ruled accidental. A fire weather advisory had been issued for the region 7 hours before the bonfire was lit, and the site had no fire permit. Dasha had not checked the advisory. No criminal charges were filed. The bachelorette content was never posted. Finn put out a brief public statement, and the channel went dark shortly after.